Alright, what's up everyone? It's Goose, and today I'm going to be going over yet more pickups for this FGN. So last time I compared the EMG 85X to the Fishman Fluence Modern Ceramic. Just for my personal use, I felt like the 85X was the one for me. There were still more options that I wanted to explore, and so here we are. The three pickups I'm going over today are the EMG 57.7, the EMG 85.7X, and the Fishman Fluence Modern Alnico. All three of these are Alnico 5 active pickups, so they're very similar in terms of like materials that the pickups use. I wanted to see just how different these are because while they are all Alnico 5s, the EMG 57 is using the old preamp from EMG, the 85X is using a newer X series preamp, and the Fishmans are, well, they're the Fishmans. The results might end up being that most of these sound the same. I know there's been a conversation recently about basically pickups not mattering as much, especially in high gain scenarios, and this video won't be doing any favors for the people who think that pickups do make a difference, because I feel like all these pickups do sound very similar. The ones that we're going over today are definitely a lot more similar than they are different. Hopefully the recordings, as well as some explanations I'll be doing, do a decent enough job of explaining the differences that I'm noticing, and hopefully it helps anyone who's been kind of on the fence about either the X series EMGs or the Fishman Fluence pickups. Today I'm going to be using my FM9, which will have a clean tone through a Vemuran Jam Ray, a sort of rock crunch tone with the orange rock reverb, and a high gain metal tone through the Friedman BE100. Cabs I'm going to be using is the Lurkst 412, which is Alex Lifeson's 412 with greenbacks in it. The strings will be completely the same since I have locking tuners here. I can literally just take the strings on and off again. The pickup heights will be all the same. And for the Fishman Alnico, I'll be only using voice 1. I think voice 2 of the Fishmans technically should be more up my alley. And for my purposes only, voice 2 just doesn't cut it for me on the Fishmans because of the volume drop. For every Fishman I've tried, it always drops about 2 dB for the volume compared to my passives, and also the active voices as well, so they just aren't my favorite. So I wanted to see how the Alnico voice 1 compared to how I remember the ceramic voice 1. And so yeah, here we go. For the clean tone, I think the 85X and the Fishman sound really similar. The Fishman's maybe slightly less bassy than the 85X, and probably a little bit less mid-range as well in the Fishman, but they are so similar that honestly, I at some point forgot which file was which, and I had to make sure that I was lining up the correct file with the correct text. The 57 is more unique. It's definitely adding a little bit of gain. It's clipping the signal basically. There is definitely a little bit more compression happening, and so you hear like less bass and less highs. Of all three, the 85X is probably the one that sounds most like a passive here. Fishman's very, very close, and the 57 definitely sounds more like an EMG normally would. On to the rock tones. All right, so for this kind of rock crunch tone, this time around, actually, the 57 and the Fishman sound more similar. And so with the 85X, you actually hear kind of the dynamics. Like, it's actually louder almost in some of the instances, and that's because it's not compressing as much into the signal. And I feel like you can just hear more like dynamics within the tone versus the Fishman and the 57 being a little bit more compressed and almost actually at the point where I feel like I could play them at high gain or use this tone as a high gain tone. All right, on to the metal tones. With the metal tones, we're actually back to the 85X and the Fishman sounding really similar. They both are pretty dynamic. I feel like the 85X has been kind of the most passive sounding through all three of these, whereas the Fishman, once you add a little bit of grit to it, it does tend to become a little higher gain, even at lesser gain values, which is impressive because the cleans are actually still pretty clean. But what really surprises me is that the Alnico Fishmans don't compress as much as I remember the ceramic Fishmans did. I actually would have considered just using the Alnico Fishmans if I hadn't tried out the 85X because I feel like it's right where I want it to be. And this is just voice 1 too, but I feel like the low end feels decently passive and there is enough high end detail to where I don't feel like there's too much compression even at high gain. 85X here sounds the biggest. It is just a little boomy in the bass. It's kind of probably going to be really hard to tell, but I think that despite that, I think they're just really similar between the 85X and the Fishman. So really the difference between these two would be like battery life, honestly. And then the 57 actually sounds like my 81 from like a really long time ago that I used to have. And I think it sounds really good depending on the genres you're playing. I would definitely use this with thrash metal. Like this sounds perfect for something from like the 80s thrash metal bands like Metallica or Slayer. It's just a very like mid-rangey forward tone. The added compression actually makes the tone stick out a little bit more, which a lot of people from like back then when the mixes were a lot muddier and there wasn't quite as much definition in the guitar tones, I feel like that was a good thing because it would help the guitar stand out a little bit more. Versus nowadays, like distorted tones are actually a lot cleaner and they're less like gainy, and so however the 57 is compressing for higher gain tones is actually kind of impressive that it would be so clear despite being as kind of mid-rangey forward and compressed as it already is. And then I was also asked if I could do a test of the noise, and so what I ended up doing was I just turned a few things on my desk and I turned off the gate played a note and then recorded the noise after, so you can hear kind of the difference between the actual tone and the noise from the pickups. Keep in mind that this is kind of a worst case scenario. You'll be basically hearing the pickups in their worst possible case. So I definitely feel like the 57 is a little bit noisier than the other ones. Not to a degree where I think a noise gate wouldn't just solve it though. I think either way, like you're going to be using a noise gate under high gain, and I think it's fine either way. So which of these three would I pick? I actually don't know. Between the 85X and the Fishman Alnico, I think these two have been my favorites. So I might just keep them in the guitar, swap them around a little bit, see which one I like and which one I prefer. The 57, it is not quite to my taste. I think it sounds great. I just don't think it's like fitting to my other guitars. So for context, I switch around guitars a lot, and I think it's really important for my guitar tones to stay as consistent as possible between guitars. That's why I've been looking for an active pickup that sounds like a passive pickup. And I think the Fishman Alnico and the 85X have been the closest thus far. I might check out a Blackout in the future too. I really have enjoyed the demos I've heard of the Blackout, so that might be coming soon. But yeah, that's kind of a comparison between all of these pickups. I think they're all good in their own way. I mentioned this on TikTok, but there is no such thing as a better or worse pickup. It is literally what the pickup can do to complement your playing. So using these demos, I'm finding what is working for me, but what might work for me, what might not work for others. So feel free to share in the comments which one you liked more, because that is a absolutely valid opinion. And to answer the question that I'm probably going to be putting as like the title of this video, do pickups matter? And while the Fishman Alnico and the 85X are very similar, you can't deny that the 57 definitely sounds different than the two. And in my opinion, that has a lot to do with just the chain that I'm running. Maybe with certain pedals or certain different parts of the chain, you might not be able to tell as easily, but I think for what it's worth that these pickups do sound different, and it's really just about trying to find the one that's right for you. And so yeah, that's going to do it for me. If you liked the video, please consider hitting subscribe and like, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Later!